You know, there's something absolutely heartbreaking about watching a woman realize that the man she married doesn't want her anymore, not just physically, but in every way that matters. He doesn't want to talk to her, doesn't want to take weekend trips together, doesn't even want to sit on the same couch while watching television. It's like watching someone slowly disappear from their own life. And unfortunately, I've seen this pattern play out in countless marriages across America. What makes it even more devastating is that most women have no idea they're actually causing this rejection themselves. They think they're being good wives, helpful partners, supportive spouses, but in reality, they're unknowingly pushing their husbands away with every well-intentioned action. The irony is almost cruel. This is exactly what happened to Jessica Martinez, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher living in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. If you met Jessica at a neighborhood barbecue or school fundraiser, you'd probably think she had everything figured out. She was the kind of woman who always remembered to bring homemade cookies to PTA meetings, who kept her house spotless, who made sure her two kids, Emma and Luke, were always dressed perfectly and had their homework done on time. But behind closed doors, Jessica was living a nightmare that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Her husband, David, a 36-year-old electrician who worked for a large construction company, had become a stranger in his own home. He'd come back from work, grunt a hello, grab a beer from the fridge, and disappear into the garage where he'd tinker with his tools until dinner. During meals, he'd eat in silence while Jessica tried desperately to engage him in conversation about their day, the kids' activities, or weekend plans. The rejection was suffocating. When Jessica would try to snuggle up to him while watching television, David would stiffen and find an excuse to get up. When she'd suggest they go out for dinner, just the two of them, he'd mumble something about being tired or having too much work to catch up on. The physical intimacy in their marriage had dwindled to almost nothing, and when it did happen, it felt mechanical and distant. What Jessica didn't realize was that her daily interactions with David were slowly eroding his attraction to her. Take last Tuesday morning, for instance. David was getting ready for work when Jessica noticed he was about to leave wearing a wrinkled shirt. "Honey, you can't wear that to work," she said, walking over to him with a fresh shirt from the closet. "This one looks much better. And don't forget, you have that doctor's appointment at 3. I already called to confirm it for you." David's jaw tightened slightly, but he took the shirt without saying anything. Jessica continued, "Oh, and I picked up that special protein powder you mentioned wanting to try. It's supposed to be really good for your back problems. I read all the reviews online." As David headed toward the door, Jessica called out, "Drive carefully. The weather app says there might be rain later." She watched him leave, feeling like she'd been a good wife, looking out for him, taking care of details he might forget. But what Jessica saw as love and care, David experienced as suffocation and control. In his mind, his wife was treating him like a child who couldn't pick out his own clothes, remember his own appointments, or make decisions about his own health. Every helpful suggestion felt like criticism. Every reminder felt like nagging. Every act of service felt like judgment about his capability as a man. The real breaking point came on a Saturday morning in late October. Jessica had been planning a weekend getaway to Flagstaff to see the fall colors, something she'd been looking forward to for weeks. She'd already made hotel reservations, researched restaurants, and even packed most of their clothes. "David, we need to leave by 9 if we want to beat the traffic," she announced while making breakfast. "I've got the GPS route all mapped out, and I printed backup directions just in case. Oh, and I packed your hiking boots and that blue jacket you like." David stood at the kitchen counter, coffee mug in hand, staring out the window. "I don't want to go to Flagstaff," he said quietly. Jessica looked up from the eggs she was scrambling. "What do you mean? We planned this weeks ago. The hotel reservation is non-refundable." "I never planned anything. You planned it. You made the reservations, you picked the restaurants, you packed the clothes. I'm just supposed to show up and follow your itinerary." The words hung in the air like a slap. Jessica felt her chest tighten. "I thought I was being helpful. I thought you'd appreciate not having to worry about the details. I didn't ask for your help, David said, his voice flat. I can make my own travel plans. I can pick my own restaurants. I can even pack my own clothes, believe it or not. Fine, Jessica snapped, turning back to the stove. Next time I won't bother trying to do anything nice for us. David set his coffee mug down hard on the counter. That's not what I'm saying, Jess. I'm saying I feel like a passenger in my own life. Like you've decided I'm too incompetent to handle basic adult responsibilities. That's ridiculous, Jessica shot back. I'm just trying to make things easier for you. You work hard all week, and I thought you'd want to relax and not have to plan everything. But I never asked you to plan everything. You just took over. And now when I try to have an opinion or make a decision, you've already made it for me. The argument escalated from there, with Jessica defending her intentions and David expressing frustration he'd apparently been holding in for months. They ended up canceling the trip, spending the weekend in tense silence, with David disappearing to work on a friend's motorcycle and Jessica cleaning the house with aggressive efficiency. That night, lying in bed with David's back turned to her, Jessica felt more alone than she had in years. How had they gotten to this point? When had taking care of her husband become a source of conflict instead of connection? She remembered the early days of their marriage, when David would light up when she walked into a room, when he'd pull her close and tell her how lucky he was to have her. Now, she felt like she was annoying him just by existing. The next few weeks followed a familiar pattern. Jessica would try to connect with David, and he'd find ways to avoid her. She'd ask him about his day, and he'd give one-word answers. She'd suggest activities they could do together, and he'd claim he was too busy or tired. The more she reached out, the more he pulled away. What made it worse was that Jessica could see David was different around other people. At their neighbor's Halloween party, she watched him laugh and joke with the other men, saw him actually smile and engage in conversation. But the moment they got home, he retreated back into his shell. Why can't you talk to me the way you talk to everyone else? She asked him one evening after they'd gotten home from dinner at her sister's house, where David had been perfectly pleasant and sociable. Because everyone else doesn't constantly tell me what I'm doing wrong, he replied, heading upstairs without another word. Jessica stood in their kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her domestic competence. The spotless counters, the organized spice rack, the color-coded family calendar on the refrigerator, and felt completely lost. She was doing everything right, wasn't she? She was taking care of their home, their children, their schedule. She was trying to be the perfect wife, the kind of woman who made her husband's life easier and better. So why did it feel like she was failing at the one thing that mattered most? The answer to Jessica's question lies in understanding something that most women never learn. There's a fundamental difference between being helpful and being controlling, between showing love and showing distrust. When a woman constantly manages, reminds, and organizes her husband's life, she's essentially communicating that she doesn't believe he's capable of handling his own responsibilities. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness. The more she does for him, the less he does for himself, which then confirms her belief that he needs her management. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Men are hardwired to want to be heroes, especially to the women they love. When a wife takes over every decision, every plan, every detail of their shared life, she's inadvertently robbing him of the opportunity to be her hero. Instead of feeling needed and appreciated, he feels criticized and controlled. Instead of feeling like her partner, he feels like her child. This dynamic is particularly destructive because it creates a vicious cycle. The more controlled a man feels, the more he withdraws. The more he withdraws, the more his wife tries to manage and fix things. The more she manages, the more emasculated he feels. And men simply cannot maintain romantic and sexual attraction to someone who makes them feel like a little boy being managed by his mother. Jessica's intentions were good, but her approach was slowly killing the very thing she was trying to protect, her husband's love and desire for her. Every time she picked out his clothes, she was telling him she didn't trust his judgment. Every time she made his appointments, she was saying she didn't believe he could manage his own schedule. Every time she planned their activities without his input, she was positioning herself as the adult and him as the child who needed to be told what to do. The tragedy is that David had probably once been attracted to Jessica's take-charge personality. In the beginning, her organizational skills and attention to detail likely felt like wonderful compliments to his more laid-back nature. But over time, what had once felt like partnership had morphed into something that felt more like parental oversight. This is why David could be charming and engaging with their neighbors and friends, because they weren't trying to manage his life. With them, he could be himself, make his own choices, and express his own opinions without fear of correction or improvement. But at home, he felt like every move was being watched, evaluated, and potentially corrected. The irony is that Jessica thought she was showing love through her actions, but David was receiving the message that she didn't respect or trust him. And for men, respect is like oxygen. They literally cannot thrive in a relationship where they don't feel respected. This is why David's attraction to Jessica had been steadily declining, why he'd been pulling away both emotionally and physically. Understanding this dynamic is the first step toward healing a marriage that's been damaged by well-intentioned but misguided control. The woman who learns to step back and allow her husband to be the man in the relationship often discovers that the man she fell in love with is still there, just waiting for the space to emerge. The turning point came on a cold December evening when Jessica found herself standing in the laundry room, folding David's work shirts and crying. She'd been doing laundry for their entire family for 12 years, and suddenly the weight of it all felt crushing. Not just the laundry, but everything. The meal planning, the appointment scheduling, the bill paying, the social calendar managing. When had she become responsible for every single detail of their lives? That's when her sister Carmen called. Carmen had been married to her husband Miguel for 15 years, and Jessica had always admired their relationship. They seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company, still held hands when they walked, and had this easy, playful dynamic that Jessica envied. "I can't do this anymore," Jessica found herself saying into the phone, her voice breaking. "David doesn't want me. He can barely stand to be in the same room with me. I feel like I'm married to a stranger." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Jess, can I ask you something? When's the last time you asked David for help with something?" "I ask him for help all the time. He never follows through." "No, I mean really asked. Like, admitted you couldn't handle something and needed him to take care of it." Jessica paused, a shirt half folded in her hands. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, when's the last time you said, 'I can't do this,' instead of, 'You should do this'? When's the last time you let him make a decision without telling him what you think the right choice is?" The question hit Jessica like a physical blow. She couldn't remember the last time she'd asked David for genuine help. The kind where she actually needed him, not the kind where she had a specific way she wanted something done and was delegating tasks. "I'm just trying to keep everything together," Jessica said weakly. "I know you are, but maybe David wants to help keep things together too. Maybe he wants to be needed, not just told what to do." That conversation planted a seed that grew over the next few days. Jessica started noticing her own behavior with new eyes. She watched herself interrupt David when he was talking to their kids, correcting the way he loaded the dishwasher, reminding him about things he'd probably remember on his own. She realized she'd been treating him like an incompetent employee rather than her partner. The first time she tried to change her approach, it felt terrifying. It was a Tuesday morning and Jessica was running late for work. She'd overslept, both kids needed to be at school early for different activities, and she'd forgotten she was supposed to bring cupcakes for Emma's class party. Standing in the kitchen, feeling overwhelmed and panicky, her first instinct was to start barking orders at David. Instead, she took a deep breath and did something she hadn't done in years. She walked up to him and said, "David, I can't handle this morning. I'm completely overwhelmed and I need help." The words felt foreign coming out of her mouth. She was used to being the one who handled everything, who had solutions for every problem. Admitting she couldn't manage felt like admitting failure. But David's response surprised her. Instead of looking annoyed or put upon, his whole posture changed. He straightened up, looked her in the eye, and said, "What do you need me to do?" "I don't know," Jessica said, and she meant it. I can't figure out how to get everything done this morning." David was quiet for a moment, and Jessica could almost see him thinking. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll take both kids to school. You handle the cupcakes. We'll figure it out." It was such a simple exchange, but something fundamental had shifted. Instead of Jessica telling David what to do, she'd presented him with a problem and trusted him to solve it. And he had stepped up immediately. The cupcakes were store-bought instead of homemade, and David forgot to remind Emma about her library book. But both kids got to school on time, and Jessica didn't feel like she was managing every detail. More importantly, when David came home that evening, he actually seemed to want to talk to her. "How did the cupcakes go over?" he asked, settling down next to her on the couch, the first time he'd sat close to her in months. "The kids loved them," Jessica said. "Thank you for handling the school run. I don't know what I would have done without you." David smiled, a real smile. "I'm glad I could help." Encouraged by this small success, Jessica started looking for other opportunities to let David be her hero instead of her subordinate. The next week, when their kitchen sink started leaking, her first instinct was to call a plumber and schedule the appointment. Instead, she found David in the garage and said, "The kitchen sink is leaking and I have no idea what to do about it." "Let me take a look," David said, and Jessica heard something in his voice she hadn't heard in a long time. Confidence, competence, the tone of a man who knew he could handle a problem. He spent the next hour under the sink, and while he couldn't fix the leak completely, he managed to stop the worst of it and had a clear plan for what needed to be done. "I'll pick up the parts tomorrow after work," he told her. "Should have it fixed by the weekend." Jessica's old instinct was to worry about whether he'd remember to get the parts, whether he'd get the right ones, whether they should just call a professional. But she bit her tongue and said, "That sounds perfect. Thank you for taking care of it." The sink got fixed, and more importantly, David walked a little taller around the house for the next few days. Jessica began to understand that her husband didn't want to be managed. He wanted to be trusted. But the real breakthrough came during a conversation that almost turned into their worst fight yet. It was a Friday evening, and David came home with news that his boss had offered him a promotion that would mean more money but also more travel. "I don't know if I should take it," he said over dinner. "It would mean being away from home about 1 week out of every month." Jessica's immediate response was to start listing all the reasons why the promotion was a bad idea. The kids needed their father around. The travel would be hard on their marriage. What if there were emergencies while he was gone? What if Emma had a problem at school and needed him? But something made her stop mid-sentence. Maybe it was the way David's face had closed off, the familiar look of a man preparing to defend himself against criticism. Maybe it was remembering Carmen's words about letting him make decisions. "Actually," Jessica said, taking a breath, "what do you think? Do you want the promotion?" David looked surprised. Yeah, I think I do. It would be a big step up, and the money would help with the kids' college funds. But I wanted to know how you felt about it first." Instead of immediately voicing her concerns, Jessica tried something different. "I trust you to make the right decision for our family," she said. "Whatever you think is best." The words felt dangerous coming out of her mouth. What if he made the wrong choice? What if the travel was too much? What if she ended up resenting him for being gone so much? But David's entire demeanor changed. He sat up straighter, looked her in the eye, and said, "Really? You trust me to decide this?" "I do," Jessica said, and realized she meant it. "I married you because I believed you were smart and capable. I still believe that." David reached across the table and took her hand, something he hadn't done in months. "I want to think about it over the weekend," he said. "I want to make sure I'm considering everything." That weekend, Jessica watched David wrestle with the decision. He researched the company's travel policies, calculated the financial benefits, even talked to other men who traveled for work about how they managed family life. He wasn't being careless or impulsive. He was being thoughtful and responsible. On Sunday evening, he told her he was going to take the promotion. "I think the benefits outweigh the challenges," he said, "and I promise I'll do everything I can to minimize the impact on you and the kids." Jessica felt a flutter of anxiety, but also something else: pride. Her husband had carefully considered a major life decision and come to a conclusion he felt good about. Instead of feeling like she needed to manage the situation, she felt like she was married to a competent adult who could handle complex choices. The shift in their dynamic was becoming more obvious. David started initiating conversations about work, about the kids, about their future plans. He began taking on responsibilities without being asked. When the washing machine started making strange noises, he researched repair services and scheduled the appointment himself. When Luke needed help with a science project, David took charge of getting the materials and walking their son through the steps. But perhaps the most significant change was in how David treated Jessica. He started asking about her day and actually listening to her answers. He began suggesting activities they could do together. One Saturday morning, he surprised her by announcing he'd arranged for her sister to watch the kids so they could go hiking together, something they hadn't done in over a year. "I miss spending time with just you," he said as they walked through the desert preserve near their home. "I miss talking to you." Jessica realized that she'd missed it too. When had they stopped having real conversations? When had they stopped enjoying each other's company? Somewhere along the way, their relationship had become all logistics and no connection. The physical intimacy started returning gradually. David began sitting closer to her on the couch, reaching for her hand while they watched television, giving her longer hugs when he left for work. The kiss goodnight stopped being a perfunctory peck and became something that lasted a few seconds longer, something that felt like it meant something. But Jessica's biggest revelation came when she realized how much energy she'd been wasting on trying to control David's every move. All those years of managing his schedule, monitoring his choices, correcting his methods, it had been exhausting. Now that she was letting him handle his own responsibilities, she had mental and emotional space for herself that she'd forgotten existed. She started reading again, something she'd loved before kids and household management had consumed her life. She signed up for a pottery class at the community center. She began going out with friends without feeling guilty about leaving David to handle bedtime routines or weekend activities with the kids. The change in Jessica's energy was noticeable to everyone around her. Her sister Carmen commented that she seemed lighter, happier. Her friend Beth mentioned that Jessica seemed more relaxed at their book club meetings. Even the kids responded to the shift, with less tension between their parents. The whole household felt more peaceful. But the most dramatic change was in David's behavior toward her. The man who had been avoiding her, who had seemed to barely tolerate her presence, was now seeking her out. He started bringing her coffee in the morning without being asked. He'd text her during the day to ask how things were going. He began planning date nights and weekend activities. One evening in January, about 2 months after Jessica had started consciously changing her approach, David came home from work and found her in the kitchen making dinner. Instead of his usual quick hello before disappearing to another room, he walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I've been thinking about you all day," he said, his voice warm in a way she hadn't heard in years. Jessica leaned back against him, feeling something she'd almost forgotten, the sensation of being desired by her own husband. "Yeah? Yeah, I was thinking about how lucky I am to be married to you." This shift in their relationship dynamic illustrates a fundamental truth about masculine psychology that most women never learn. Men are not motivated by criticism or management, but by respect and trust. When a woman constantly corrects, reminds, and organizes her husband's life, she's communicating that she doesn't believe he's capable of handling his own responsibilities. This creates a psychological dynamic where the man begins to fulfill her low expectations, becoming less reliable and less engaged because he feels like his efforts are never good enough anyway. The moment Jessica started saying, "I can't," instead of "you should," she activated something powerful in David's masculine psychology, his drive to be her hero. Men are biologically and psychologically wired to want to solve problems and provide for the people they love. When a woman admits she's overwhelmed and needs help, she's giving her husband the opportunity to be strong, capable, and needed. This is why David's entire demeanor changed when Jessica said she couldn't handle the morning routine. Instead of feeling nagged or criticized, he felt called upon to be the solution. His confidence returned because he was being asked to use his strength rather than being told he was using it wrong. The promotion decision revealed another crucial aspect of masculine psychology. Men need to feel trusted to make important choices. When Jessica said, "Whatever you think is best," she was communicating profound respect for David's judgment. This kind of trust is like oxygen for men. They literally cannot thrive in relationships where they don't feel respected and trusted. The return of physical intimacy and emotional connection wasn't coincidental. When a man feels respected and trusted by his wife, when he feels like her hero rather than her problem to solve, his natural attraction to her returns. The same man who had been avoiding Jessica, who had seemed barely able to tolerate her presence, was now seeking her out because the psychological dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. This transformation happens because respect and trust create a positive feedback loop in relationships. When a woman shows faith in her husband's capabilities, he rises to meet her expectations. When he succeeds, she feels genuine appreciation, which motivates him to do even more. This cycle builds on itself, creating the kind of passionate, connected marriage that both partners truly want. The real test of Jessica's new approach came in March, when everything seemed to go wrong at once. David's first business trip for his new position was scheduled for the same week that Emma came down with strep throat, the hot water heater died, and Jessica's car started making an ominous grinding noise. The old Jessica would have panicked, made a dozen phone calls, and probably resented David for being away when she needed him most. But this time, when David called from Denver to check in, Jessica found herself responding differently. "How's everything going?" he asked, and she could hear the genuine concern in his voice. "Well, Emma's fever broke this morning, but now Luke's complaining about a sore throat. The house is freezing because we have no hot water, and my car sounds like it's going to die any minute," Jessica said, then added something that would have been impossible for her 6 months earlier. "I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed, and I miss having you here to help me figure this out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with all this alone," David said. "What can I do from here?" "I don't know," Jessica admitted. "I guess I just needed to hear your voice." "Okay, let me think," David said. "Can you call my brother Tony about the water heater? He might know someone who can come out today. And for your car, there's that shop on Camelback Road that I've heard good things about. As for Luke, there's that urgent care place that doesn't require appointments." Jessica felt something shift inside her chest. David wasn't just giving her a to-do list. He was problem-solving with her, offering solutions while acknowledging that she was handling a difficult situation. She wasn't being managed. She was being supported. "That actually helps a lot," she said. "Thank you." "I'll call you tonight to see how everything went," David said. "And Jess, I appreciate you handling all this while I'm away. I know it's not easy." After they hung up, Jessica realized that this conversation would have gone completely differently in the past. She would have been angry that David wasn't there, would have made him feel guilty about the timing of his trip, and would have handled everything herself while building up resentment. Instead, she'd been vulnerable about her struggles, and he'd responded with support and appreciation. The water heater got fixed, Luke didn't have strep, and the car just needed new brake pads. But more importantly, when David came home on Friday, he walked through the door with flowers and a bottle of wine. "I kept thinking about you dealing with all that chaos this week," he said, pulling her into a hug. I wanted to do something to say thank you. Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time David had brought her flowers? When was the last time he'd thought about her struggles and wanted to acknowledge them? I missed you, she said into his chest, and meant it completely. I missed you too, he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. That night, lying in bed after they'd made love for the first time in months, Jessica marveled at how different everything felt. The physical intimacy had been tender and connected in a way that had been missing for years. David had been present with her, attentive to her, like he actually wanted to be there instead of just going through the motions. David, she said softly, can I ask you something? He murmured, his arm tightening around her. What changed? I mean, I know I've been trying to do things differently, but you seem so much more, I don't know, like yourself again. David was quiet for a moment. I feel like you actually like me again, he said finally. For the longest time, I felt like everything I did annoyed you or disappointed you, like you were just waiting for me to mess up so you could fix it. Jessica's heart clenched. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't, but when someone's constantly correcting you or telling you how to do things better, it's hard not to feel like they think you're incompetent. I thought I was being helpful, Jessica said quietly. I know, but I didn't need that kind of help. I needed you to believe I could figure things out on my own. I needed you to trust me. This conversation opened up a level of honesty between them that they hadn't had in years. Over the next few weeks, they started talking about things they'd been holding back. Frustrations, dreams, fears they'd been afraid to share. David admitted that he'd been considering asking for a transfer to a different department because he thought Jessica disapproved of his career choices. Jessica confessed that she'd been feeling lonely and disconnected, like she was living with a roommate instead of a husband. I was so focused on managing everything that I forgot to actually enjoy being married to you, she told him one evening as they sat on their back patio watching the sunset. I forgot that I used to look forward to coming home to you, David replied. Somewhere along the way, home started feeling like a place where I was always doing something wrong. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they handled conflicts. In April, they had what could have been a major fight about money. David had used their credit card to buy a new tool set for his workshop without discussing it with Jessica first. The purchase wasn't huge, but it was more than they usually spent without talking about it. The old Jessica would have been furious about the lack of consultation, would have lectured David about financial responsibility, and would have made him feel like a child who couldn't be trusted with money. Instead, she found herself taking a different approach. I saw the charge from Home Depot, she said when David got home from work. I'm feeling a little anxious about spending right now, with Emma's orthodontist bills coming up. David's shoulders tensed slightly. I probably should have mentioned it first. I can return the tools if you want. I don't want you to return them, Jessica said. I just want to understand what prompted the purchase so I don't worry about our budget. David explained that his old tools were wearing out and affecting his ability to do side jobs that brought in extra income. The new tools were an investment that would actually help them financially in the long run. As he talked, Jessica realized that David had actually thought this through carefully. He wasn't being irresponsible or impulsive. That makes perfect sense, she said. I'm sorry I worried about it. I trust you to make good decisions about things like that. David looked at her with surprise, and something that looked like gratitude. Really? Really. You're not going to bankrupt us buying tools, and you know our financial situation better than anyone. I don't need to approve every purchase you make. That evening, David spent time explaining his side business to Jessica, showing her the projects he'd been working on and how the new tools would help him take on more profitable jobs. It was the kind of conversation they might have had years earlier, when they were still learning about each other's interests and ambitions. I didn't realize how much thought you put into all this, Jessica said, genuinely impressed by David's planning and initiative. I've been doing this for 2 years, David said with a slight smile. I just never talked to you about it because I figured you'd worry about me taking on too much. Jessica felt a pang of sadness. How many other parts of David's life had he stopped sharing with her because he expected criticism or concern instead of interest and support? But instead of dwelling on the past, she decided to focus on the present. Well, I'd like to hear about it now if you want to share. The conversation lasted until almost midnight, with David describing his various projects and Jessica asking questions that showed genuine curiosity rather than concern. She found herself remembering why she'd been attracted to David in the first place. His competence, his creativity, his ability to solve problems with his hands. By summer, their friends and family were commenting on the change in their relationship. At a 4th of July barbecue, Jessica's friend Beth pulled her aside. I don't know what you and David are doing differently, but you guys seem so much happier together, Beth said. You're actually enjoying each other's company again. Jessica looked across the yard where David was helping Luke and some other kids set up a water balloon fight. He caught her eye and winked, making her smile automatically. We're just learning how to be married to each other again, Jessica said. Well, whatever it is, it's working. You both seem more relaxed. That night, as they were cleaning up after the party, David came up behind Jessica as she was washing dishes and wrapped his arms around her waist. Thank you for today, he said. For what? Jessica asked, leaning back against him. For letting me handle the situation when Luke got upset about the water balloons. For not telling me I was grilling the burgers wrong. He paused. For making me feel like you're proud to be married to me. Jessica turned in his arms. I am proud to be married to you. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel otherwise. You didn't make me feel anything, David said, his hands framing her face. I just wasn't hearing the things you meant to say. I was only hearing the things that made me feel criticized. And now? Now I hear that you love me, that you trust me, that you think I'm capable of taking care of you and our family. He smiled. It makes me want to be the man you see when you look at me. That conversation crystallized something important for Jessica. She realized that her husband had always been the same man, competent, caring, responsible. What had changed was her approach to him. Instead of trying to improve him or manage him, she was simply appreciating him. And that appreciation had awakened something in David that had been dormant for years. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. There were still moments when Jessica caught herself about to offer unsolicited advice or take over a task David was handling. There were times when David fell back into old patterns of withdrawal or defensiveness, but now they both recognized these patterns and could course-correct more quickly. More importantly, they had rediscovered the fundamental truth that had brought them together in the first place. They actually liked each other. They enjoyed each other's company. They were better together than apart. One evening in late August, almost a year after Jessica had started consciously changing her approach, she found herself in the laundry room again, the same place where she'd had her breakdown months earlier. But this time, instead of crying over David's work shirts, she was smiling as she folded them. David appeared in the doorway. Need help with that? I'm almost done, Jessica said, but thank you for offering. Actually, I was hoping you'd say yes, David said with a grin. I like folding laundry with you. Jessica laughed. That's probably the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm a romantic guy, David said, stepping into the room and picking up a towel to fold. I just needed a wife who'd let me be romantic. As they worked side by side, Jessica reflected on how much had changed. The man who had once avoided her, who had seemed barely able to tolerate her presence, was now seeking out opportunities to spend time with her. The husband who had once felt like a stranger was now her closest friend again. The key insight that Jessica had discovered was that marriage wasn't about perfection or control, it was about connection and trust. When she'd stopped trying to manage David and started trusting him to be the man she'd married, everything else had fallen into place. The respect she showed him had returned to her multiplied. The trust she'd placed in him had made him more trustworthy. The appreciation she'd expressed had made him more generous with his time and attention. This transformation illustrates the most powerful principle in relationship dynamics. What you focus on expands. When Jessica focused on David's shortcomings and tried to correct them, those shortcomings seemed to multiply. But when she started focusing on his strengths and appreciating his contributions, those positive qualities flourished. The psychological mechanism at work here is something called the Pygmalion effect, the tendency for people to rise or fall to meet the expectations placed on them. When Jessica treated David like he was incompetent and needed management, he began to act incompetent and dependent. But when she started treating him like he was capable and trustworthy, he began to embody those qualities. This doesn't mean that David completely transformed as a person. The man who became more engaged, more romantic, and more responsible was always there. What changed was Jessica's approach to him, which created space for his best qualities to emerge and flourish. The return of physical intimacy and emotional connection was a natural result of this shift. When a man feels respected and trusted by his wife, when he feels like her hero rather than her project to improve, his natural attraction to her returns. The same dynamic that had been creating distance and resentment began creating closeness and desire. This is why Jessica's marriage didn't just survive, it thrived. By learning to trust her husband's capabilities, appreciate his contributions, and allow him to be her hero, she had rediscovered the passionate, connected partnership that both of them truly wanted.